Welcome to the Awesome Marriage Podcast. We're so glad that you are joining us today. I'm in the studio here with Dr. Kim to talk about what to do if your marriage is drifting, how to recognize the signs, and how to reconnect. Before we get started, I want to mention one really great free thing that we have for you. If you want to stay connected, it is Dr. Kim's Marriage Multiplier email. It is free, it is quick, it is practical, and it is once a week. You get this email with lots of great ways to continually invest in your marriage so that you don't drift. So if you're interested in that, you need to check it out. The link is in today's show notes. You can also find it at awesomemarriage.com. Stay tuned to the end of the episode and we'll talk about a few more things that we have for you. But let's go ahead and get into this conversation about how to reconnect. Are we ready, Dr. Kim?
Yes, we are.
All right. So I want to start by talking about this cultural idea that I think that it seems to be very accepted culturally for marriages to drift apart over time. I think that people just kind of expect it. Do you think that? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think so. I think the first thing I see is, with younger couples, these intense romantic feelings, this newness of the relationship. Well, that's going to kind of naturally evolve over time, and it's normal. But when a couple doesn't see it that way, they may think that we're just drifting apart instead of saying we're entering a new season of marriage. And this new season of marriage can have all those things, but it may just take a little different turn at that point. I mean, the way, when we were at 20 years old, with most, we talk about open and more of us lust than anything else. Well, and so that over time, it kind of changes and into a different type of love and care and those kind of things. And so it's not like you're drifting apart. It's just kind of going into a new season. And so I think too, as couples go, they have this pressure on marriage from their careers to kids, financial stress. Maybe they were in small group and they don't have time for that anymore. And so they're not prioritizing the things that can build a relationship. And then all of a sudden they normalize this. And so they get this self-fulfilling prophecy. They expect to go, as you go longer in marriage, that you're going to grow distant in marriage, and you just accept that. And so when we've not normalized that culturally, this drift, that it's inevitable rather than something that we can prevent, then that causes a big problem, because what we know in awesome marriage, what research shows, that couples that work on their friendships, continue dating, intentionally nurture their emotional intimacy, their physical intimacy, they're going to have long, vibrant, healthy relationships, awesome marriages. And when you don't, so I think, my concern is the same thing. It's when we act like that's normal. And I think one of those is why we're seeing so many couples in 20 plus years of marriage divorcing now. It's because they didn't continue to nurture the relationship, and maybe everything they had in common is gone. Like maybe the kids are out of the house, or whatever it was, and then it's like, well, we don't have anything here.
Yeah.
And then you think we're different because we've drifted apart. Well, you probably are, but that doesn't mean that can't be put back together. Right. It's a lot easier to keep nurturing it all the way through. That's doing the things that we talk about all the time, of consistent time together every day, listening well, good communication, date nights, trips, all those things that build your relationship. You just can't put those on the back burner for a few years and expect not to drift apart.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's a really good point you made, that it's actually easier to continue doing those things. I think a lot of times the assumption is it's kind of easier to just kind of let things slide, and maybe you'll deal with it later when you have more time. That's not easier.
No, it's not, because you don't ever have more time.
Right.
It's what you prioritize. I could have gotten to that. Well, when we do this, get to this point, I'll have time for that, and realize, no, I need to cut something now and make time for it now, because if I don't, I will never get there.
Yes. Yeah. I was with a girlfriend last week who has a little baby. She said, "Oh, I just can't wait till he can talk so he can tell me what he needs and what he wants." I said, "Really?"
He can also say no.
Exactly. Okay, that's not going to be easier. It's going to be really fun, but that's not going to be easier necessarily. Right. In every stage, it's like,
it's just different.
You just kind of think the next one around the corner is going to be a little easier. Things will calm down.
No, each one's just different.
And I think it helps to kind of realize that, instead of, I know for years, Brian and I kind of thought, we were in survival mode. We just kind of would like keep things afloat. And he was, he would tell you this if he was here, but he was a workaholic. So he was really kind of married to his ministry
Sure.
job. And, so that was where his energy went. And we didn't even have really time to fight, but we weren't investing. And
Yeah,
we didn't invest and we didn't change because things slowed down. We changed because we realized we had to prioritize it and put our money where our mouth was about the importance of marriage.
absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that's a good point because I know we have a lot of ministry couples, people that listen,
Hmm.
and I think that is a trap a lot of people in ministry
Mm.
fall into, that the
Hmm.
ministry we equate ministry with our relationship with God. Well, I'm doing this
Hmm.
for God. God's gonna take care of her. She's gonna be okay
Hmm.
back there. She can handle the 17 kids. I don't need to be there. You know? And instead of knowing, no, God says him first and your marriage second. And
Yeah,
so and he is not the church.
he is not.
It's
Mm-mm.
our relationship with him, and you
Hmm.
need to be living that out with your spouse and with your kids. And I think it's such a trap that guys get into, and women too,
Hmm.
probably in
Hmm.
ministry. The
Yeah,
same
I've seen
thing.
both.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm doing it for God.
Hmm.
Yeah, but your marriage is dying there. I heard a great story one time. I can't remember who told me, but it was about a guy, and he was a youth pastor. Man, his youth ministry was flying. I mean, he was
Mm.
tough, going being gone all the time, made all the kids basketball, football games,
Hmm.
stuff like that with the kids in his youth group. And one day he was leaving to go to a huddle group, or lead a huddle group, and his wife and the kids stood on the front porch, and she yells at him, "Hey, when are you going to have time for this group?"
Oh, wow.
And it hit
Oof.
him. He did. It did help him. It did help
Hmm.
him go in to realize what he was doing, because
Hmm.
he was thinking, I'm doing all this for God.
Yeah.
And she had bought into that too. So she wasn't going to
Yeah.
complain to him.
Yeah.
But finally, I don't know why she ended up saying that. Probably she talked to a mentor or something and said, I need some help here, or
Yeah.
a counselor. And
Hmm.
she said, we can't keep going this way.
Yeah.
You
No,
know,
that's so true. And most of the time, if you're working for a church, they're not going to slow you down. Everyone's giving you pats on the back. Everyone loves you. A lot of praise. Feels really good. They're
absolutely.
they're going to love having you there. They really
Yeah,
are. Yeah.
absolutely. And then you go home. Are you
Yeah.
getting praise when you walk to the door? Maybe
Right.
not, because she's cooking with one baby in her hand.
Yeah.
She's got two on her legs.
You're getting asked to change a diaper. Ew, go
Yeah,
go back to work.
yeah.
That's not
I think
fun.
I'll go back.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. No, and I think thankfully I do think there's some change happening there, but I think
I
that
do
that's
too.
been a really common thing. And I think that's a great point too to get into the fact that drifting isn't always obvious. Sometimes good things get in the way of the most important things, and that's really
Absolutely.
what can make drifting so easy. We've talked about parenting, careers, all these things. Ministry is very easy place for that to happen. And so it's not like you're drifting like to sin necessarily. It could be that you're
Right.
drifting somewhere good.
Right. But but I do think if you're drifting away, you're
Hmm.
more vulnerable to
Oh, yeah.
sin at
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
point. But you're right. The things we talked about that we feel the pressure on, that I said, of careers and children and finances and your
Hmm.
job and stuff like that, they're not bad things. You've got to just
Hmm.
choose the best over the good. And
Yes.
sometimes we choose the good and leave the best out there,
Yeah.
because you're right. We get accolades maybe from
Hmm.
the people that we're ministering to, or at
Hmm.
work, or
Hmm.
whatever. Everybody at work thinks I'm great. What's wrong with you?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you didn't bow down when I walked in the house. It's
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
no, you didn't pat me on the back.
Right.
So, but that's not what really counts in a
Hmm.
marriage or in life. I mean, that you chose to live your life with that person, and to make that person so valuable in your life, and you're not
Yeah.
going to do that by drifting apart or putting effort somewhere else.
No, no, that's true. Yeah. And I mean, I'll say, as a mom, I struggled with, kind of getting more validation from the kids in a sense
Yeah.
than I did from Brian because, when they were little, I wouldn't fight with them, but I would fight with him. And they just thought I was a rock star. They needed me for everything. They're like,
Oh
"Oh, you're
yeah.
you're the chosen one for will you please do this? You're the best at cutting my sandwich. You're the best at,
Right.
reading this book." And I just felt like, well, that kind of feels like a pat on the back too.
Absolutely.
But over time, if you don't have that really solid marriage, they're not going to be thinking you're a rock star the whole time. I'm
No, you
sorry to
fall
say it.
there's sometime at some point you fall off the pedestal.
And then it really hurts when you don't
Yeah.
have that, if you've placed your value there, that
Right.
is really tricky.
And that can be hard. That's where I think I've seen so many kids over the years that are probably 14 or 15, and they're saying, "My mom still treats me like I'm 9 or 10."
Mhm.
And I think part of that is just you grow up quick. The other part is you could do more for them then. They liked you
Yeah.
better then, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so
that's
maybe
true.
yeah, and so you're trying to kinda go back into that season instead of
Mhm.
accepting more in a new season.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like that's probably a more common experience than we would even realize because I don't know how often we're talking about that.
Yeah, I think it is pretty common, and I get it, and I've talked to parents about it too,
Mhm.
and most of the time when I bring it up, especially after I've talked to the child, they go, "Yeah, that makes sense." And
Yeah.
so then we talk about how do you embrace this stage, and how do you were finding, like you were saying, your worth in a place that was gonna change,
Mhm.
instead of in your relationship with God, your
Mm.
marriage that you want to last for a lifetime.
Mhm.
Because kids do, they change. They're so much fun, and I
Yeah.
agree with you. Every season it was wonderful, but each one was different, and they
Mm.
lead you less
Yeah.
in different stages in their different seasons.
Yeah. And that's a good thing. That's really good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't
Mhm.
want them living in my basement, when they're 35.
No.
No, that's not good for them or us.
No, it's not. That's good. Yeah, it's hard to see it coming, but it's really important. So, I'm curious about you and Nancy in your marriage. Have you experienced seasons where you started to drift apart?
Yeah, I think so. I think we had to get the kid thing right. We had trouble getting pregnant, so when we had our kids,
Mhm.
we'd been married 5 years, and we had wanted a baby for so long.
Mm.
And so I think it was easy to just put everything there. And I think it
Mm.
was even more when Julie came along,
Mhm.
just to do that and kind of let our marriage not, maybe we'd skip date nights, maybe do some things that just seem like they're not that bad, but
Mhm.
then you realize you're not as connected as you were. And so I think those were seasons. I think work for me, building a practice took a lot
Mhm.
of effort, and going through school, going back to school,
Mhm.
getting, there were times when I was exhausted because
Mhm.
I'd be counseling during the day, like when I was working on PhD, and then I'd come home and be with Nancy and the kids for a little bit, and then they'd go to bed, and I'd study till 1 or 2 in the morning, and then
Mm.
get back
Mhm.
up at 6. And so I think that season I didn't do well
Mm.
about balancing my time. And part of it was you can't really avoid it when you're on some deadlines and
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, there's accountability there, but there were things I could have done different.
Mhm.
And I think that was one that Nancy really hung in there when she probably wasn't getting much out of me
Mm. Mhm.
during that time.
Mhm.
And so I think, yeah, we did. I think each time we did figure it out,
Mhm.
and it didn't become a long term pattern.
Mhm.
It too became kind of a season. And I think that's where we kind of got with when I was finishing my PhD, is this we're almost at the end. We got
Mm.
2 months, and I defend my dissertation, and then
Mhm.
and so that always helped too, to
Mhm.
know that there was an end, because sometimes she told me one time, said, "Are you going to always go to school?" Because I'd
Mhm.
done 2 masters, 2 doctorates, and I thought,
Wow.
I guess not.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to get. And that was me. That was my obsession. It's like I loved going back to school
Mhm.
because I hated undergraduate. I barely graduated from TCU. 2.0 is what you had to graduate, and I had to go to summer school
Oh my
to
gosh.
graduate.
Yeah.
But then you get into grad school, and every course was something that I devoured, that I
Yeah.
loved, and it was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Now I'm valedictorian in grad school, and I got in on probation.
Wow.
Every yeah, when for a master's, I was on probation for a semester because I don't think this guy will make it.
And then you just kept on going.
And I
You
just
made
kept
it and
on
you kept
going.
on making it.
I just enjoyed it. So I think we had,
Awesome.
those are things you've got to communicate on and figure out how
Mhm.
do we do that
Mhm.
during this time, and trying to involve Nancy in it. When I'd go
Yeah.
to, a lot of the stuff was done virtually, but there were times that I would, and virtual is different than it is now,
Mhm.
but they would go and be on campus for 2 weeks or 4 weeks at a time and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And there were times that she would go with me, part of that or things like that. And so I tried to involve her, where she got to know, like, one of my professors she got to be very good friends with. And that
Mm.
lady visits us every year around Christmas.
That's so cool.
So, yeah. So trying to figure out things seasons that are tough, how do you make it better
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
what we realized we've got to do.
That's good. And it's funny because you talked about some really good seasons. Like we've been saying, like good stuff, career stuff, building a practice, going back to
Mhm.
school for every single degree under the sun,
Yeah.
apparently, Dr. Kim. I'm impressed. But,
Uh,
I'm wondering about with other couples too. I mean, I know you see all kinds of different things with the couples you counsel. What are the common things leading them to drift apart? Same stuff, different stuff?
well, I think life getting in the way that I think in our culture is just, I think everybody's even aware of it,
Mhm.
but we don't know
Mhm.
anything about it. I mean,
Sure.
people, I mean, if you ask somebody how they're doing, 90% of the time here, people I talk to say busy,
Ah, yeah. Pet
you know,
peeve. Pet peeve.
but yeah. And I go, really?
Yeah.
So are you busy with your kids and your marriage?
Right.
You know, what are you busy with? I think we can take each other for granted,
Mhm.
and so I think that is a real danger that
Mhm.
I've always got to know that Nancy is a gift and that I
Mhm.
want to embrace that gift and treat her like a gift every day. Some days I do a lot better than others,
Mhm.
but that's my goal on that, not to take her for granted. And I think the fact that drifting just takes it happens gradually.
Mm.
My
Mhm.
favorite story, I used this years ago, but it was this experience when we were at the beach with grandkids, and Tommy was probably 7, and so we had all our stuff, and I said, "Let's go jump waves." So started we jumped waves, just Tommy and I out there, and we'd probably been out there an hour. And I said, "Well, let's go back in." And we started back in. Tommy goes, "Somebody stole our stuff." Our stuff was about, I don't know, 50 yards up the beach
Mhm.
because we drifted and didn't even realize we knew that we were drifting.
Mhm.
We had been so caught up in what we were doing, and it was a
Mhm.
lot of fun, but we drifted and didn't realize it until we
Mm.
started back on the beach. And oh my gosh, where's our stuff? Well, it's way back
Mhm.
up there because you drifted. I think that happens in marriage. The same
Mhm.
thing. You don't even realize a lot of times that you're drifting, and then you look up and go, "Where's our stuff? Where's that
Yeah.
marriage we were building? Where's that
Mhm.
date night? Where's those times together? Where's those long communication times that really bonded us together?"
Mhm.
And so I think, to me, I think that's what happens a lot, and it goes back to we just have to you've got to get our priorities right. I was in a meeting. I think I've told this before, years ago, back before we used our calendars on phones. We had paper calendars. In this meeting, there's like 10 guys, and the guy that was leading had us go around and name the 3 most important things in your life. And all of us put God, family, ministry.
Mhm.
And so he said, "Okay, now open your calendars. Show me where you've got God on your calendar. Show me where you've got your
Mm.
family on your calendar, your marriage on your calendar." And it was like, okay.
Mm.
So my time with Nancy, dates and stuff, time in after, it's on my calendar now.
Mhm.
Just because, I mean, I do it, but I don't know. It's just got to be a priority. It's got to
Yeah.
be a priority. And so it's just making those decisions
Mm.
for your marriage,
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And you reap the benefits. I mean, we didn't get to 55 years of marriage by doing everything wrong and not connecting. And
Right.
I've seen couples, honestly, that make it that far, and that's kind of what they live. They live separate
Mhm.
lives in the same house. And to me, that is so sad
Mhm.
because they're missing out on what can happen. So what you want to do is continue to build, like we talk about in our book, Love, Intimacy, and Sex in the Second Half. It's not to read after you get to retired, is to
Mhm.
read while you're going up. So you do the things that help you
Mhm.
build those things into your marriage. So when you do have the empty nest, that it's like, oh, wow,
Mhm.
we have built a good foundation. And now look what we get to do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
That's a long answer.
Well, there's a lot there, and I really like that you mentioned that just how subtle it can be, because I think
Yes.
you're right. I think a lot of times you kind of see little bits of it, but you just kind of think, well, of course, that's normal. But then you don't realize, like you and Tommy in the ocean, how far you've gone.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's a sobering realization.
Yeah. And you may even talk, maybe like you'd be with a group of friends and they're all kind of
Mhm.
saying the same thing, but nobody's doing anything about it.
Right.
You're kind of making feel, well, I'm okay because everybody else is in the same boat, but really none of you are okay
Yeah.
because your marriage is drifting.
Gosh, that's so true. Yeah, and that's so frustrating too when you kind of have it's like an open conversation, like, yeah, it's not going great, but everyone's just accepting it.
Yeah, exactly.
Frustrating.
Exactly. It's like, yeah. Instead of saying, hey, what's not going great?
Right.
Hey,
Yeah.
what can you do? Those kind of
Yeah,
things.
because you
And
can.
yeah.
You can do something. Yeah, so I'm curious when this was going on for you and Nancy. I mean, it sounds like you had some different kind of phases of drifting, but how did you realize it was happening?
Oh, I think we would get short with each other,
Mm.
impatient with each other.
Mhm.
I think that was and still can be a sign. Nancy's
Mhm.
love language is quality time,
Mhm.
and you just don't build up a bank of that. It's
Right.
something that has to happen every day, and so when it does not happen, I can tell we
Mhm.
just get a little edgy with each other, and so then we knew we're not as connected with each other. And I
Mhm.
think early in marriage, it was kind of hard to put a name on what was happening.
Hmm.
Just knew things were different, and we didn't like where our marriage was going. We couldn't put a tag on it, but we would say things like, "We need a date night," or "We need
Mhm.
this," or "Did you notice that we're just picking on each other all the time?" And
Mhm.
that's not helping things. So we would try to acknowledge what was going on, really, because kind of what you're
Mhm.
saying. I think a lot of times we ignore it.
Mhm.
Well, it's not that big a deal. You go,
Mhm.
it's over. He maybe she's had a bad day, and maybe you do. But when the bad day turns into a bad month,
Yeah.
then you got to realize something's going on here that's not right and not healthy for our marriage.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think it's look for those signals in your marriage.
Mm.
Look for what's different, makes you cringe, what makes you think, we're I'm not feeling the same. I'm not thinking the same. We're not on
Mhm.
the same page like we were. And then do something about it when you do realize it.
Yeah.
Sometimes we let it go too far and it
Mm.
was much harder to get back there. But when you catch it early and you both acknowledge it, then you can do something about it.
Yeah. Yeah, you actually
Yeah.
can. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really good. Yeah, so you mentioned a couple of things for you and Nancy. Are there any other common signs you see that a couple is drifting apart?
Yeah, I think if your communication changes,
Mhm.
that your conversations really are transactional.
Mm.
They're logistics, scheduled, things like that. Instead of talking about feelings, dreams, experience, things that really
Mhm.
connect us with each other.
Mhm.
Physical and emotional intimacy decreases, or it's not just the same as it was. The thing, what I see couples do a lot is, okay, maybe we're still having sex, but we're not looking each other in the eye. We're not patting each other on the back when we go by. We're not sitting
Mhm.
close together when we're watching TV or sitting on the couch or whatever, stuff like that. And
Mm.
so that physical, emotional intimacy and that stuff really binds us together. I mean,
Mhm.
God created us to touch and to be close together. I think when you start thinking, I don't want to share that with him or her, maybe it's a
Mm.
personal stuff, maybe it's a fear, maybe it's something, anything like that, and you think, it's something pretty big in your life, but you just don't share it with them.
Mhm.
And why? What's happened in your marriage because at one time you shared everything with each other.
Mhm.
So what happened? Well, you probably drifted apart
Yeah.
in some ways. Your lives get separate. So I was playing golf once a week. Now I'm playing 6 times a week.
Oh, yeah.
Uh, you know, Free time is spent separately, and it's fine to
Mm.
have a girls' night, boys' night. I'm not saying anything like that, but at the expense of not doing things together or not
Mhm.
including each other, that's going to cause you to drift apart. Conflict patterns shift, and so maybe you were doing pretty good with conflict, and all of a sudden we're more critical of each other. We're
Mm.
avoiding conflict. Maybe you feel like I don't care, and I don't want to even fight it. I don't care. I'm not
Mhm.
gonna. I don't agree, but I'm not gonna have a fight. Well, what
Mhm.
does that do? That just pushes you farther apart.
Yeah.
And the whole idea of being a team, when that begins to phase, I think that's a big red flag.
Mhm.
And then I think with all of those, some of those happen temporarily, probably with
Mhm.
all of us. Maybe it's a stressful period. Maybe something is things going on, life situations, and it's not necessarily a permanent drift. The key is when these patterns become your new normal
Mm.
without efforts to kind of reconnect and to get
Mm.
back together. So I
Mhm.
think that's just like when I was in school, being able to say, yeah, we probably lacked in some of those areas.
Mhm.
When we saw it was a season, we're almost at the end,
Mhm.
then it was easy to pick back up at that point and say, let's go. Let's
Mhm.
do these things back. Now we've got more time to do those things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's really good. So, for you and Nancy, when you were starting to realize the signs, so you did, like you were saying when you're in school, you saw it
Yeah.
happening. What did you do? What was the process?
I think it always started with a conversation. One of
Mhm.
us would say, you know, usually it was Nancy saying, I'm not feeling close to you.
Mhm.
And then sometimes I probably said, uh, okay. and walked away. But I
Oh, boy.
tried to look, okay, what makes you feel close? So we talk
Mhm.
about that. What are we not doing? What have we dropped that really was connecting us that we're not doing?
Mhm.
Maybe we're not having our daily time together.
Mhm.
Maybe we're not valuing our differences. And so we're letting
Mm.
those differences irritate us instead of embracing them as something that can help grow our marriage. Yeah, too few date nights, things like that. So I think for us, it would always start with, it really was, when I think about it, usually Nancy saying, I don't feel close to you.
Mhm.
And to me, that was a red flag. And so then we said, okay, what do we need to do here? Because I
Mhm.
probably wouldn't have been the first to say it, honestly.
Mhm.
I just don't think I would have. And
Mhm.
thank goodness that she would and felt comfortable doing that. And I think over time, when she would realize that I valued when she said that,
Mhm.
then it made it easier for her to say that, because that was
Mhm.
like, okay, here's a red flag. We need to do something about it. And I would join her in that. So that helped a
Mhm.
lot.
Yeah, that sounds like that would help a lot, but you also kinda said at first, maybe you didn't see it as a red flag, you maybe
No.
didn't value it. So what happens if one spouse does, work up the, gumption to say, "I'm not feeling so close," and the other one just kinda goes, "Okay." Or, like, what happens if they don't really play along or don't take that?
Yeah, I think if that is something consistent, if you try that 2 or 3 times and your spouse
Mhm.
gets the same response, I wouldn't do it probably on the first one. Maybe something's going on.
Mhm.
In my mind, yes, they should acknowledge that.
Mhm.
But if it continues, then I think you go to counseling. And
Mhm.
I would say in that situation, it might be good for you to go by yourself.
Mm. Mhm.
Kind of make sure you're doing everything right, communicating
Mhm.
well, those kind of
Mhm.
things. And then hopefully, once you make sure you're straight, if things don't get better, then you ask your spouse, hey, let's go to counseling together. But I
Mhm.
think what you don't want to do is do nothing.
Right. Right.
If it gets to that point,
Yeah.
that and to me, I think going to a counselor is really important, because you have good friends that probably love you to death that are going to give you really bad counsel.
That's true. Yeah.
And so
Mhm.
I think you've got to be better, because if they're really
Mhm.
good friends, one, they may empathize with you completely
Mhm.
and say, well, my husband's a jerk like yours. Well, what does that do?
That didn't help anybody.
No, that didn't help anybody. So I think make sure you go to somebody that can be objective
Mhm.
and kind of is for your marriage and is
Yeah.
able to look at a big picture and be willing to tell you that, hey, I think, why don't you try this, and this, and see
Mhm.
how your spouse responds to that. And then you go through that process. And if the
Mhm.
spouse responds, great. If they don't, then you kind of say, hey, we need to go to counseling. We go to counseling with me.
Yeah.
If they don't, then go back to your counselor and see what you need to do.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's, you bring up a really great point about if you're going to your friend, like say I go to one of my girlfriends and she's like, yes, girl, I get you. I hear you. I empathize completely. Well, that's not really helping either of us because a lot of times I think if you're talking to a same sex friend, it's not always, but often there are some kind of common
Mhm.
communication tendencies that wives will have and then that husbands will have. And a lot of times you're just not able to see that difference when you're talking to your good friend. If I'm talking to one of my good girlfriends, she's probably had a similar frustration and we've probably had similar communication shortfalls, things
Yeah,
that we've thought we did a good job communicating, but our husband would say, I never heard anything like that come out of your mouth because there are just some differences in the way we might communicate. A lot of women will
absolutely.
accidentally be hinting or insinuating rather than coming right out and saying it. Maybe you wait till you're frustrated, so you say it real angry, and then he thinks, "Well, that was an outburst," and then it blows over, but it's not taken seriously. So there's some really helpful perspective you can get from a counselor that a friend might not be able to give you, not because they're bad, just they don't see it.
Right, they're gonna see it through a different lens and account,
Hmm.
and if they really love you, they're not gonna be probably as objective.
Yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
sometimes it's hard to be, and so, yeah, I think you wanna talk to someone that's really gonna help you with your
Hmm.
situation.
Hmm.
Then you can have the support of friends, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Pray for me.
Hmm.
I'm going through this. This is what I'm trying. Met with my counselor. This is what the counselor suggested I do. So will you pray for me as I'm trying to
Hmm.
do these
Hmm.
things? I'd be consistent. Things like that. That's where you really want to bring your friends in.
Absolutely. Well, and then you know what I've seen with that too is when you do that, then your friend goes, "Oh, they said to try that. I'm going to try that too," and
Yeah,
then you all benefit.
it's exactly. It's
So
a
good.
snowball
Yeah,
effect.
it's a
Yeah,
good snowball.
exactly.
That's really
Yeah,
good.
that's good.
So, if we have listeners today who are just kind of stuck in this drift, maybe they know it, maybe they don't, maybe they're just now sort of thinking about it. What steps do you encourage them to take to start reconnecting today?
You know what I've seen some couples have just kind of come to this conclusion, but have a dedicated electronics free time every day.
Mm, mhm. Mhm.
Because I think it's so easiest for us to get consumed in that. One thing I've started doing is not being on my phone when I'm in line at Starbucks.
Mhm.
Used to, that was a fun time, and it's usually I can find somebody to at least say something to, you
Yeah.
know? It may be
Yeah.
by the time I get the line and talking to the barista, but
Mhm.
whatever. It's still people that on your phone, you get your order and you stay on your phone. You don't know if it's a man or a woman or a
Yeah.
dog that,
Yeah.
took your order.
Yeah.
So I think that's important, and find that time. Maybe it's in the morning, maybe after kids leave. I know some couples have a little time in the morning. Maybe it's before bed.
Mhm.
Maybe it's when you first get home, whatever works for you. And give it 20 to 30 minutes. I'd love to see you do it an hour, but
Mhm.
start with something that you get the benefit of. And in that time, sure, just share something about your day, not just what
Mhm.
happened, but how it made you feel.
Mhm.
Joe got fired, so how'd that make you feel? Or something like that.
Mhm.
Something that you can begin to communicate with. That's where I think some of our questions, resources that we have that you can are really good. I've got couples that I'll
Yeah.
say, pick one each day. Just take
Mhm.
one, talk about that question. And there's, I don't know, 100 or so on each resource probably.
Mhm.
You got a wealth of things to talk about. And if
Oh,
you get
yeah.
one that you don't want to talk about, you skip it. But it
Mhm.
gives you kind of a guide to begin to talk about things that'll take you a little bit below the surface, not dangerously below all of it,
Mhm.
but to help you get there. I think the other thing I think is important is opportunities for non-sexual physical touch.
Mhm.
Sitting close when you're watching TV. I was tapping Nancy on the shoulder if she's sitting in a certain chair and I walk by. And she enjoys that. I don't know
Mhm.
why, but she enjoys that. So it's just these casual, comfortable things that you do,
Mhm.
and maybe it's, for us, it's patting each other on the rear, we'll
Mhm.
do, we both do that with each other at times, but it's, I don't know, it's an acknowledgement, it's a physical touch. And I think that helps. And I think we don't do enough of that, of the
Mhm.
non-sexual, anytime when I come home and it's been a rough day and I get a hug, it just energizes me. And I think that's why
Mhm.
God made us with these touch receptors all over our body.
Mhm.
Try some new things together. Maybe I've got a lot of couples that seem to cook together anymore.
Hmm.
So find a new recipe, do it
That's
together.
fun.
When you do your walk together, go on a new route, learn a card game together, something different. Just anything that can create some new things of some newness and some things you
Mhm.
enjoy, or other things that can create some memories, conversations,
Mhm.
things like that. Just try some new things. I think that really, really helps you. Sometimes you just need that jump start.
Mhm.
A lot of times the last couples, when we talk about doing something together and they go, "Well, I don't know what to do." So we'll say, "What did you do before you got married?" Usually there's a bunch of things, and usually there's a couple of those things that they could still do.
Yeah.
And so if that worked then, it's probably gonna work now. Start with that.
Yeah.
Begin doing that. And then I think the big thing that we've talked a lot about over the last few years is gratitude each day. One
Mm.
specific thing that you noticed or you appreciate about your spouse. If one, I think for if it's me and Nancy, it helps me look for something positive, which
Mhm.
kind of can overcome any negative patterns that might have developed. And then I'm able to say that thing to her. And when we do that for each other, it just becomes very reciprocal, and it's just it you're not drifting when you're doing that. When you're
Mhm.
thinking about what you're thankful for with your spouse and share that with them, it connects you. And, check ins on the relationship, like we've talked about, our weekly couple checkup,
Mhm.
those kind of things. And then
Mhm.
it's kind of realizing you're drifting,
Mhm.
starting small, and then being
Mhm.
consistent. In other words, don't say, okay, we're going to climb Mount Kilimanjaro or whatever it is. Well, go ahead, but do
Yeah.
something that you can do today. Don't do things that might seem overwhelming
Mm.
or just seem, just these small positive interactions. When you do them day after day after day,
Mm.
they build emotional intimacy. And you get to where I can't wait to get home. I can't wait to
Mhm.
see my spouse. I can't wait for us to spend that time together. I can't wait that we have this getaway this weekend or we're going out to dinner, just the two of us.
Mhm.
Then you start looking forward to those things, and then you're not drifting.
Yeah.
So it's being
Yeah.
intentional, I guess, more
Mhm.
than anything. All the stuff I've said is really just being intentional.
Mhm. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's little stuff. It's like you said, you could climb Mount Kilimanjaro, but maybe don't start there. Start with something you can do right now, because that's
Yes.
what is intentionality if it's not producing some fruit for you, you know?
Right. Right. Do something you enjoy. Don't do, Nancy and I
Yeah.
realized we couldn't do competitive things together
Yeah,
because we're
yeah,
too committed. So we just
yeah.
didn't. When you'd have a
Mhm.
fight after playing tennis,
Right.
it's like, well, great. We had a great time for a while and then we started fighting
Yeah.
so
No, that's
find
good.
stuff that you can enjoy together.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's really good and fun. There's a lot of fun stuff in there.
Absolutely.
Even the little like the gratitude, things like that, those are fun when you start incorporating them. They make your life more fun, more and better.
It does, and look for opportunities to,
Mhm.
like when I talked about that Nancy and I decided we'd start running errands together instead of
Mhm.
trying to she conquers this, I conquer that, then we'd get
Mhm.
back home and we could do something. We just combined that. Took a little longer, but we were together the whole time. And so
Yeah.
look for those opportunities
Yeah.
that you can spend time together that maybe you're just kind of overlooking right now.
Mhm. Yeah. The chances are they're somewhere. You'll find
Yeah,
them.
absolutely.
That's good. Well, Dr. Kim, this has been a really helpful conversation on starting to reconnect if your marriage is drifting and how to know if it is. Do you have any final piece of advice for our listeners today?
Probably that if you feel like you're drifting, don't accept it.
Mhm.
Just because you see everybody around you drifting a little bit or everybody's
Mhm.
busy, don't accept it.
Yeah.
Sit down with your spouse and say, hey, I think we're starting to drift, or maybe we've been drifting a long time. Let's do something about it.
Yeah.
And then begin the conversation of what do we do? And if you need a
Mhm.
counselor to help you, go to counseling. Probably
Yeah.
with something like that, unless there's a big issue, counselor can probably get you on track in a couple of sessions, and then you can
Mhm.
kind of check back in a month or so later and kind of refine it. But just don't settle for drifting,
Mhm.
because I think that's where these couples that we're seeing get divorced after 25 years of marriage. I think a lot of them, that's what happened. They
Mhm.
accepted the drift and they let it go so long that was they just gave up.
Mm.
And so they
Mhm.
said, well, I'll try something new, which I would guess most times don't work.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
percentage of second marriages that work is very, and I know some ones that have worked great,
Mhm.
but the percentage is higher divorce rate than a first
Yeah.
marriage.
Yeah. It's true.
Guess you drag your same baggage in there. Then
Mhm.
you're drifting from number two,
Mhm.
and so it's fix what you got in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good word. That's really good. And so I want to remind you, if you're listening, we have lots of resources that can help you. I want you to just start somewhere. And we've got a lot of great things. A couple I'm going to mention is the Dr. Kim has already mentioned the weekly marriage checkup guide. We have that for free on our website. You can grab it right now. We also have the creative questions to ask your spouse, which he mentioned a little earlier. These are two amazing free resources we have for you. You can find them in today's show notes, or if you go to awesomemarriage.com/resources, we have a whole tab of freebies, all kinds of free resources, because we want you to just pick something. There's all kinds of different categories, different types of resources. Whatever it is that's causing you to drift, find something that looks fun to you, that looks good to you, and just try it. We also have a version Bible reading plan called Reconnect, and it's just 10 days of scriptures and devotionals to get you reconnected with your spouse. Make sure to grab whatever you would like to get started on. You can find those links in today's show notes, so don't hesitate to do that. Also, remember, we mentioned at the top of the show Dr. Kim's weekly marriage multiplier email. And this is just a really quick and practical way to invest in your marriage each week. So grab whatever you need. Don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@awesomemarriage.com if there's anything we can do for you. Have a great day and do something awesome for your marriage today.